Weimer was a young mother doing her best to make ends meet.
I was a single mother raising 3 girls, and I had a part-time job.
Curtis Haith was a young man trying to make it on his own.
He worked in the factory for a little while, kind of struggled a little bit.
Their paths crossed one night at a party.
Everything was going good. We were drinking a couple beers, socializing.
And that night of drinking would change both of their lives forever.
A neighbor heard gunshots.
Curtis Haith was found lying outside of his apartment.
He was severely beaten and also shot in the face.
Within hours, the police were at Crystal's door.
Someone had come to the police and said, well, I know I saw these people together.
But did that mean she had something to do with Curtis's death?
The investigators found Crystal covered in blood.
You gotta look at her as a suspect.
But why would Crystal kill someone she barely knew?
They got a lot of conflicting stories.
There had to be a reason.
The search for that reason would haunt investigators in this small Pennsylvania town for years.
They were forced to try to figure out who was lying and who might actually be culpable in this crime.
And many fingers were pointing at Crystal Weimer.
Here's the thing about investigations. You look at a suspect to exclude them. And when you can't exclude them, then you know you got them.
January 27, 2001, Connellsville, Pennsylvania. 50 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, the mountains that surround this town of 8,000 once fueled the furnaces that forged America.
It has a deep history of coal, so it has seen a lot of boom and bust over the years.
But by 2001, the mines were mostly a memory as the fading town struggled to survive.
There's some people that have been there all their lives and would never leave. Some people just want to get out.
It has its fair share of crime.
And at 4:50 that Saturday morning, a neighbor of 21-year-old Curtis Haith made a harrowing call to 911.
A neighbor heard gunshots, heard Curtis pleading for his life.
And when Connellsville police arrived on the scene minutes later, they found Curtis lying on the sidewalk outside his apartment on the city's south side.
He had been beaten very severely, and there was a gunshot wound to his face.
Despite the efforts of EMTs on the scene, Curtis didn't make it.
The patient was dead at the scene. The patient was the victim of some type of external trauma and possibly gunshot.
As paramedics packed up, investigators at the crime scene began looking for clues that might indicate what had happened in the moments before Curtis was beaten and shot.
In a case like the Haith murder, the crime scene obviously is very important.
Although beyond the fact that Curtis had been both beaten and shot, the investigators had little else to go on.
There were witnesses who lived next door who said that they had heard some noises, but they weren't able to identify anything that had happened.
Which meant that the only option for the investigators was to try and retrace Curtis's final steps and interview the last few people to see him alive, a list that would include 23-year-old Crystal Weimer. Born in 1977, Crystal Weimer grew up in a working-class Connellsville family back before the mines and mills closed down.
My father worked on a shipyard growing up, and my mom was always at home with us. And she always cooked and made sure we were off to school and things like that. She was there for us.
She was a sweet little girl. Had a lot of friends she played with, and she was a sweet little girl growing up. Never gave me no problems.
And one of 4 sisters, Crystal had no problem standing out in a crowd.
I was very outgoing. Whenever I was in school, I was involved with softball. I played on the cheerleading squad, and I also was on the swimming team. Whatever sports or whatever I could get involved with, I was ready.
However, it wasn't just athletics and cheerleading that made Crystal's school years memorable.
She got pregnant when she was 16.
Crystal gave birth to a little girl, but never finished school.
She stayed home taking care of her baby until she got old enough, and then she got a job at Wendy's.
And over the next couple of years, Crystal and her boyfriend had 2 more children, but the relationship eventually ended.
We wasn't very compatible. Therefore, I wasn't ready for marriage and stuff, so we just went our separate ways.
Crystal was left a single mom, and to support her family, she traded part-time fast food work for a full-time job at a local factory.
I worked at Sony and I worked online assembling the TVs, but after I was there for a while, they ended up moving the company and the whole corporation got sold out.
By 2001, the 23-year-old was struggling to get by.
I was a stay-at-home mom, taking care of my children and raising them and working part-time.
She was barely getting by, just like a lot of people in the dried-up coal country area of the United States.
Although as hard as things were for Crystal, her sisters faced even tougher obstacles.
Her family, she has several sisters, and a lot of them have had trouble with the law.
Still, for all their troubles, Crystal remained close to her siblings. And on the evening of January 26, 2001, they got together at her sister's house in Uniontown, a small community 20 minutes from Connellsville, to hang out and catch up.
We were at a party at my sister's, and we had a few friends over there that night.
One of those friends was 21-year-old Curtis Haith. Although born in Michigan, in his teens, Curtis and his family had moved to Connellsville, his mother's hometown.
I was in Detroit, Michigan, really struggling, to raise my children. And Detroit seemed like such a rough city to raise them. And so that's what brought me back to Connellsville.
The family didn't leave their struggles behind, though. While Curtis's single mother worked multiple jobs to support the family, young Curtis took over the family meals and soon showed a flair for it.
He loved to cook. I remember him winning a big package. It was like steaks, a big steak package and things like that. And he was just happy about that. And we ate steaks like all day.
And when he graduated high school, his passion for food took him to culinary school in Pittsburgh.
He went to Pittsburgh. He wanted to manage some sort of restaurant or something. So he went to college in Pittsburgh.
It was a shock to me that he was going to go away because none of us ever really been away from home. But I was so happy it was only Pittsburgh.
But despite his ambition, he wouldn't stay there long.
We couldn't afford it, so then he came back to Connellsville.
Back home, Curtis took a job to make ends meet, but his dreams of being a chef slipped further and further away.
He worked in the factory for a little while. He kind of struggled a little bit.
Still, he wasn't bitter about the disappointment.
He was just the sweetest could be, kind heart, would do anything for you.
And while he'd only been living in Pennsylvania a few years, he'd built a strong support network too, which included a cousin of Crystal's.
Curtis had went to school and grew up with my cousin, and that's whenever I first met Curtis Haith.
That was on the evening of January 26th, when Curtis and Crystal's cousin dropped by the party at Crystal's sister's house in Uniontown.
We were drinking a couple beers, socializing, talking about, our life and different things, and we were enjoying ourselves. Everything was good.
However, despite the good time, Curtis was eager to get back to Connellsville, where he was supposed to meet up with some friends for a belated birthday toast.
His birthday was January the 8th, and he was having a celebration out and about in Connellsville.
So around 10 o'clock that evening, Crystal's cousin drove Curtis Haith the 12 miles back home to Connellsville, and Crystal tagged along. Curtis did eventually arrive at the bar and celebrate with his friends, and they would end up continuing the party back at Curtis's apartment. But the mystery of what exactly happened in the final hours of that night would raise questions for years to come and be the central missing piece in a murder investigation. Coming up, is Curtis's murder a drug deal gone bad?
2 little polyvinyl packets of marijuana.
Or will a surprising discovery point police in a different direction?
Officer Haggerty told me, either you come with me for questioning, or I'm going to the local magistrate to get a warrant.
It was around 4:30 on the morning of January 27, 2001, when a neighbor of 21-year-old Curtis Haith made a harrowing call to 911.
A neighbor heard gunshots, heard Curtis pleading for his life.
And when Connellsville police reached the scene minutes later, they found Curtis lying on the sidewalk outside his apartment on the city's south side.
He had been beaten very severely, and there was a gunshot wound to his face.
And by the time the paramedics arrived, the extent of Curtis's injuries meant that all they could do was pronounce him dead.
There was what looked like oozing out some brain tissue in that area. It limited the chances of, resuscitating and saving this gentleman.
And while the paramedics packed up and left, the crime scene investigators went to work, searching for any clues that might shed some light on why Curtis had been killed. And almost immediately, the investigators found something that might be significant.
In one pocket, he had 2 little polyvinyl packets of a grassy substance, suggestive of marijuana.
The investigators found more incriminating evidence when they went inside the apartment.
There was drug paraphernalia in his home.
Was Curtis's death the result of a drug deal gone bad?
There had to be a reason for him being beaten and shot. Possibly a drug transaction.
Unfortunately for the investigators, there were no eyewitnesses who had seen what happened. Even the neighbor who called 911 admitted that paralyzed by terror, she hadn't looked out the window or even dialed 911 until after she heard a car door slam and tires squealing as it sped off. However, while the neighbor couldn't identify the killer or the getaway car, she did have some additional information for the investigators. She told them that Curtis had people over prior to his death.
The reports were that he was at a party and then later come home and some of the people came to his home.
And according to the neighbor, the murder occurred only a few minutes after the party broke up.
From witness statements, the last partygoers from his party left his house 4:30.
Could one of the party guests be the killer? The neighbor said that she hadn't noticed any trouble prior to the shooting.
Everything seemed to be okay. He was having a good time. There wasn't any problems.
Curtis's mother was just as adamant that her son wasn't a troublemaker when she arrived on the scene later that morning.
My aunt called me and said, "Oh my God, they just found Curtis dead." And so I jumped in the car and went out to where he lived at.
And while they didn't have any leads, the investigators did what they could to reassure Curtis's mother.
When I went to Curtis's apartment, the first detective told me, he promised me, "I'm going to find out who did this."
Although at that point, all the investigator could do was track down and talk to everyone who'd been seen with Curtis the night before and hope for a lead.
They really didn't know who might have been involved.
And the list of people Curtis had come into contact with that night included 23-year-old Crystal Weimer.
Friends had told investigators that Crystal and Curtis had been seen earlier that evening, partying.
When they knocked on Crystal's door that afternoon, all the investigators were hoping for was a little insight into Curtis's movements in the hours prior to his murder.
Investigators were just simply working through a list of people who had been seen with Curtis that evening. This interaction with Crystal was just supposed to be another routine interview.
But that all changed as soon as Crystal came to the door.
It appears as though there is blood on her clothing.
She had dirt on her, she had a black eye, and she had a broken toe.
And the blood and dirt immediately led the investigators to an inescapable conclusion.
Even if you've never investigated a murder in your life, you have to look at Crystal Weimer. You gotta look at her as a suspect, right?
And based on her appearance, investigators asked her to come down to the station.
Officer Haggerty told me that I was coming with him, that there was a crime committed last night and a murder. And that's whenever I said, well, I'm not going anywhere.
Crystal's refusal to cooperate triggered a stern response from the investigators.
He threatened me, either you come with me now for questioning, or I'm going to the local magistrate to get a warrant.
Facing possible arrest, Crystal accompanied the officers to the Connellsville police station. And once there, Crystal explained to the police that yes, she had seen Curtis the night before his murder.
He was with Crystal's cousin. They were hanging out and were drinking and everything. And so that's how Crystal came around in the area for them to all be together that day.
Crystal said that she and her cousin had last seen Curtis at around 10 o'clock when they dropped him off at a bar in Connellsville. But if that was the last time she saw Curtis, the investigators wanted to know how she'd ended up bloody and bruised.
According to Crystal, the fight that she had been in occurred after she had dropped off Curtis and she returned to Uniontown.
Her story is, I was brutalized by an ex-boyfriend, right? She's got a broken toe. She walks with a limp. She got a black eye. She got blood all over her shirt.
Was she telling the truth? There was one way to find out.
Investigators asked for Crystal's clothing. They wanted to determine if indeed the blood on her clothing was Curtis's or not.
Would the forensics exonerate Crystal? It would take time to get the results. So that night, after sending Crystal home, the investigators reviewed the results of Curtis's autopsy. It revealed that the gunshot wound to his face had passed painfully, but harmlessly, through his cheek.
The gunshot wound didn't turn out to be lethal, as we would expect. The critical cause of death here was the significant blunt force trauma.
Curtis had been beaten to death. Or was it possible he'd been kicked to death?
She had a broken toe. It was too coincidental.
And when the analysis of Crystal's clothes came back from the crime lab, the mud on her garments added another unlikely coincidence.
It's consistent or similar to the dirt that was found outside of his apartment.
But while the mud on Crystal's clothes put her at the crime scene, would the blood analysis make the case complete?
As it turned out, the blood on her clothing was not Curtis's.
It actually didn't implicate her.
In fact, rather than Curtis, the blood matched her ex-boyfriend's DNA, just as Crystal had claimed.
The investigators were shocked to find out that the blood on Crystal's clothing did not match Curtis. It appeared to actually confirm that alibi and that she wasn't involved in the case at all.
It looked as if the investigators' only lead had turned into a dead end. But new evidence would soon surface that would take the case in a stunning new direction. Coming up, investigators discover a detail that was missed during the autopsy.
On Haith's hand, there was a bite mark.
And an eyewitness comes forward.
He was in the car the night that Curtis Haith died.
By October of 2002, it had been nearly 2 years since 21-year-old Curtis Haith had been beaten to death outside his Connellsville, Pennsylvania apartment.
The case went cold because there wasn't any indication of how he ended up dead in his yard.
Initially, the investigators suspected that 25-year-old Crystal Weimer had been involved.
Someone had come to the Connellsville police and said, well, I know, I saw these people together.
And when they found her the next morning still wearing bloody clothes, Crystal became their lead suspect. But then the test results came back from Crystal's clothes.
They tested it, and lo and behold, it in fact was not what the government thought or hoped it would be. The source of it was an ex-boyfriend that she'd gotten into a skirmish with that evening.
It seemed as if Crystal was off the hook, and police were back at square one with no leads on Curtis's killer.
The police have a lot of public pressure with people saying that, we don't feel safe until you find this person.
Was it possible something had happened between the time that Crystal and her cousin dropped Curtis off at the bar around 10 p.m. and 4:30 that next morning when Curtis was killed? Something that had led to murder.
Here's the thing about investigations. You don't look at a suspect to include them in a crime. You look at a suspect as a detective to exclude them.
But Curtis's family wasn't convinced that Crystal Weimer should be excluded.
It's always been Crystal Weimer from day one. If you didn't know anything, you would sympathize with the family members, and you would want to help some type of way. I never seen that from Crystal. Never.
But would Curtis's family be able to prove Crystal was involved?
I thought some stuff would come out eventually because it's a small town. I thought maybe people would start talking about it.
And in October of 2002, more than a year and a half after the murder, someone finally did. The person who talked was 35-year-old Thomas Jefferson Beal.
Bill was an ex-boyfriend of Crystal's, but he was not the ex-boyfriend who she had apparently gotten into a fight with on the evening of the murder. According to Bill, Crystal had confessed to killing Curtis one evening to him.
Had the investigators been right about Crystal all along? Beal's story seemed to back it up, but they needed more than the word of a convicted criminal. In fact, when Beal reached out to the investigators, he was sitting in the Fayette County Jail on burglary charges.
Jailhouse snitches are looking for something, and sometimes they're telling the truth, but you have to be very leery of that.
What the investigators needed was something to confirm Thomas Beal's story.
They really had no physical evidence tying her to it.
Or did they? After Thomas came forward claiming that Crystal had confessed, the investigators went back over the case file and found something they'd previously overlooked in the autopsy photos of Curtis's body.
On Haith's hand, there was a bite mark, and it was sent away for analysis with the dentist.
It may have actually been missed during the first autopsy.
Could it be the evidence the investigators needed to confirm Thomas Beal's confession story and link Crystal to the murder? In early 2003, 2 years after Curtis Haith's murder, investigators were back on Crystal's doorstep.
Investigators asked Crystal to provide dental impressions in the hopes of confirming who actually made the bite marks on Curtis's body.
Would comparing the dental impressions to the bite mark be another bust, like the bloodstains on Crystal's clothing? In May of 2003, the crime lab came back with its results. It was a match.
It was Crystal who bit my brother because the bite mark and the impression matched up. Her teeth were straight in his arm. You know, it matched right up. They showed his teeth impressions. And her bite mark, it matched perfectly.
And since the identity of the bite mark appeared to confirm the information provided by their jailhouse snitch, the investigators were finally convinced they'd found Curtis's killer.
All the evidence the investigators had, Tom Beal's story, the bite mark, they both pointed to Crystal.
Not long after receiving the lab results in August of 2003, investigators got another break in the case when an inmate at the Fayette County Jail contacted the investigators and claimed to have information about Curtis's murder.
The informant, who just happened to be locked up in the Fayette County Jail, was an old friend of Crystal's, Joey Stenger.
And a month earlier, in July of 2003, while Joey was in the Fayette County Jail on burglary charges, he'd allegedly talked to his cellmate about Curtis Haith's murder and Crystal Weimer.
He's in jail. He says, she did it. I was there. I saw it. Here's what happened.
He said he was in the car the night that Curtis Haith died.
Joseph Stenger said that evening he was out at the bar and he said he was drinking and having a good time.
But according to what Joey told his cellmate, as he left the bar later that night, he ran into Crystal.
Crystal pulled up and said, "Hey, get in. I need to talk to you."
And allegedly, when Crystal pulled up outside the bar to speak to Joey that night, she was already sporting a black eye.
Crystal told him, "Hey, there's somebody that put their hands on me."
And according to what Joey told his cellmate, that someone was Curtis.
He hit her, is what she said.
There was some indication that she may have had a fight with him earlier in the day.
And it was a fight that Crystal apparently aimed to finish.
"I want to go do something, take care of her, whatever. Would you ride with me?"
According to what he'd allegedly told his cellmate, Joey had gotten into the car with Crystal, and together they'd driven to Uniontown.
Joey Stinger's story was they picked up a couple guys who are still unidentified.
After that, Joey, Crystal, and the two men had allegedly driven to Curtis's apartment.
Crystal, as Joey tells it, walked up to the door, lured him out.
And when Curtis came downstairs with Crystal, Her two friends were waiting in ambush.
Then they beat him with a baseball bat and a crowbar.
And they beat Curtis to death, all while Crystal watched.
It was far more damning than Thomas Beale's claim that Crystal had confessed to killing Curtis.
Joey was not only a witness, he was a participant. He was someone that could give the jury a direct account of just how Curtis died.
But could the investigators and prosecutors get him to cooperate?
When the investigators went to the jail and confronted Joey with his cellmate's story, he denied the whole thing.
Did that mean the cellmate's story wasn't true? Not necessarily.
Over the next few weeks, several of his friends, including his own mother, told investigators they had heard him say the exact same story.
The fact that several people who knew Joey basically confirmed his cellmate's claims once again gave the investigators confidence in their jailhouse snitch. And on January 20th, 2004, the investigators drove back out to Crystal's house, placed her in handcuffs, and told her she was under arrest for the murder of Curtis Haith.
I was literally sick. I was sick to my stomach. I was more than in shock and crying. I was so upset. I just kept crying. I lost it. Like, I was so nervous and upset, and it was a lot.
Curtis's family was relieved that 3 years after the murder, the police had finally made an arrest.
It was frustrating to wait that long to have her brought in.
And the family hoped that more arrests would follow.
I thought maybe that she would give up the names of the other two people because she knew who they were.
But would Crystal's arrest finally bring closure to the case? Coming up, Crystal is determined to stand trial.
I didn't take a plea deal, and I believed I was coming back home because I didn't do anything.
But will an expert witness's testimony make Crystal regret her decision?
Everything just fell into place.
By April of 2004, 26-year-old Crystal Weimer had spent 3.5 months in jail, awaiting trial on murder charges. Crystal was charged with orchestrating the death of 21-year-old Curtis Haith, who'd been beaten to death outside his Connellsville, Pennsylvania apartment in January of 2001.
When Crystal was arrested, I was excited. I was ready. I wanted to know what happened. I wanted some justice.
But after years of waiting, would Curtis's family finally get the closure they so desperately sought? The case against Crystal was a complicated one, based on a single bite mark on Curtis's arm and testimony from a series of informants and witness statements.
The Connellsville police just had a lot of conflicting stuff, and they're trying to piece it all together.
And the key to piecing it together was 22-year-old Joey Stenger. In February, he'd also been arrested on murder charges after numerous people told the investigators that he'd been with Crystal on the night of the murder and helped her pick up the two men who'd actually killed Curtis.
He is the one that, in the process of not only implicating Crystal, implicates himself. And he says that he was part of this alleged conspiracy.
Earlier, when confronted with what he'd apparently told others about the crime, Joey had denied everything. But that changed once he was booked on murder charges.
After his arrest, Joey finally broke down and told the investigators that his cellmate's story was true. He was involved in Curtis's murder.
Joey's decision to cooperate was a major break for the prosecutors. And they would need it, too, because they would soon be short a witness. That April, at a pretrial hearing, the prosecutors put their first jailhouse informant on the stand, Crystal's ex-boyfriend, Thomas Beale.
Thomas Beale was the boyfriend that claimed Crystal had confessed to killing Curtis.
They brought him forward, expecting him to implicate Crystal in this crime.
But instead, Thomas made a confession of his own.
As it turned out, he shows up on that day, tries to take the Fifth Amendment. The court won't let him, and he ultimately recants his entire testimony. In the process of recanting it, looks down at the prosecution's table and says that the lead detective, is the one that told him what to say. And in fact, he goes so far as to say, I just wrote whatever he told me to put down.
Confronted with Beal's bombshell allegations, the judge had no choice but to drop the charges against Crystal.
That demonstrates the weakness of the prosecution's case.
But was it only a temporary reprieve? While Thomas had recanted his story, Joey Stenger remained in custody. And in September of 2004, when he pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges for his role in Curtis's murder, he not only admitted that he had been present when Curtis was killed, Joey confessed that he was more involved than he'd originally let on.
He has one hell of a story to tell. He says, I shot Curtis.
He said he didn't mean to hit or shoot Hayes. He said he saw the beating going so bad he tried to stop it, got out of his car, fired his weapon toward that area.
And in all the confusion, Joey said that he'd accidentally shot Curtis.
It looked like his confession was genuine to me.
If he's not telling the truth, why is he willing to go to jail for it?
Joey Stenger's confession was the break in the case that investigators had been waiting for.
I don't think there was anything really that the state could have gotten any better than what they had. I mean, you had an individual who was there, Stenger, who described the beating in detail, the gunshot, and the getaway.
On September 27th, 3 days after Joey pled guilty, the investigators were back on Crystal's doorstep with a new arrest warrant charging her with Curtis's murder.
I was very upset. I was above and beyond being upset because of them ripping me out of my life again, away from my kids for the second time for something I hadn't done.
But just how confident were the prosecutors in their case against Crystal? With her trial date looming, they approached Crystal with what appeared to be an incredible offer, a mere 2 to 4 year sentence if she pleaded guilty and named her alleged co-conspirators.
She'd already spent almost 2 years in Fayette County Prison at that point in time. So in essence, she could have been offered to be able to walk out that day or soon thereafter.
What does she do? She refuses the deal.
No matter how much her court-appointed attorney tried to convince her to take it.
The public defender just continued to come over to question me like every day until I went to trial. Are you sure, Crystal, you don't want this 2 to 4? I said, no, I'm going home and I'm not taking something I didn't do.
She absolutely believed in her innocence.
It was April 3rd, 2006, more than 5 years after Curtis's murder, when Crystal finally stood trial. In the prosecutor's opening statement, she argued that Crystal had been the mastermind who orchestrated Curtis's murder.
They said that her and Curtis might have had a falling out and she was upset.
That's what Joey Stenger claimed when he took the stand for the prosecution.
He indicated Weimer was involved and that she wanted revenge because Hayes had struck her at an earlier time.
No one made him say anything that he didn't want to say.
And then, to build on Joey's testimony, prosecutors called Dr. Konstantin Karazoulis, a forensic odontologist and bite mark expert, to the stand.
In his testimony, Karazoulis stated that the bite mark on Curtis's hand was definitely Crystal's. He also found that the bite mark must have occurred within 7 minutes of his death.
It was powerful testimony.
With respect to expert testimony and expert witnesses, I think that if you're listening as a juror and you hear, a prominent witness coming in from out of state, I think that's compelling.
And then, after 5 long years dogged by accusations that she was a killer, Crystal took the stand to tell her side of the story to the jury.
I told the truth. We dropped Curtis Hayes off at the Arch Cafe, and that was the last time I seen him. I was never at Curtis Hayes' house.
Crystal's impassioned testimony did little to sway Curtis's friends and family.
There was a lot of people that was just shocked that she could still be claiming that she was innocent.
But would her words be enough to sway the jury? When the jurors retired to consider their verdict on April 6th, Crystal was confident.
It took, I believe 4 hours into one day and 2.5 hours maybe into the next day. And I thought maybe that's a good thing. The truth has come out and I'm going to go home.
But would her hopes be validated?
When the jury came back, they found Crystal guilty of murder.
After waiting so long for justice, the verdict was an emotional moment for Curtis's family.
I was in the court when they found Crystal guilty. I was happy. You know, I wanted to thank people.
I was pretty sure that she was going to be convicted, and everything just fell into place.
Crystal, on the other hand, was surprised by the outcome.
When the jury come back and they're just like, guilty, 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 I was just like, what?
I just felt empty because I knew that she wasn't involved and they convicted her. I was just devastated.
Because in the end, there was no way she could overcome the evidence that the prosecutors had presented to the jury.
You had an eyewitness, actually not just an eyewitness, you had one of the perpetrators, and he was testifying about what role Crystal Weimer had in it. And then the bite mark evidence. Very bluntly, that was very, very strong evidence to convict her.
After the verdict, the judge sentenced Crystal to 15 to 30 years in prison.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. I was more than heartbroken. I was like, where is the truth at in this place? Like, nobody's hearing me. What is going on?
The sentence may have been a shock to Crystal, but Curtis's family found it far too light.
At the end of his life, he suffered, and I just think people should pay for that.
I couldn't understand it because how do you only get 15 to 30 years for something that you plan to do?
Crystal maintained her innocence, however.
I was confident. I swore in my heart, and I believed I was coming back home because I didn't do anything.
And once in prison, she was determined to prove it, too.
I got access to law library, and I know the only way you can come home is to fight your case in case law and educating yourself on it.
She begins to become her own lawyer, studying her case, obsessed with proving her innocence.
And the result of all that study was an 80-page handwritten letter that she sent to government officials across the state of Pennsylvania, arguing that the Connellsville Police Department had ignored dozens of witnesses and scientific evidence that supported her innocence.
It was clear that she was very desperate to get her point across. She was calling it a fundamental miscarriage of justice.
But her desperate calls for help went unanswered.
She wasn't able to get representation for the appeals that she was making, and so she was having to do it on her own.
As a result, Crystal spent nearly a decade in prison. Her 3 daughters grew up and started families of their own. Then, in 2014, her 80-page letter eventually found its way to the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, whose staffers were surprised by what they read.
It spoke to me that here's a woman who is confident in her innocence and needs a voice. And then substantively, you started looking at the facts of the case and seeing that they just simply had the wrong target of their investigation since the beginning. And when you add all of that up, you see an innocent woman that's lost a decade of her life.
Determined to get justice for Crystal, the Innocence Project took her case.
That's whenever I knew the windows were opening, and I knew there was hope. So I knew that God was hearing my prayers.
And in October of 2015, almost 10 years after her conviction, with her new attorney at her side, 38-year-old Crystal Weimer was back in court, hoping to convince a federal judge to grant her a new trial.
We went into that courtroom, and I knew I was coming home, and the truth was going to set me free.
Coming up, a witness makes a stunning reversal.
He told me, Jeff, I would have told him whatever they wanted me to say.
And Crystal's case takes a surprising turn.
Where does justice lie? Are we ever going to find justice in this murder?
On October 1st, 2015, 10 years after her conviction for the murder of Curtis Haith, 38-year-old Crystal Weimer was back in court, preparing to make her case for a new trial.
Since day one, the proper investigation was never done.
And the attorneys from the Pennsylvania Innocence Project agreed with her.
You ask yourself, how is it this possibly could lead to a conviction?
At Crystal's 2006 trial, a forensic odontologist had testified that a bite mark found on Curtis Haith's body matched dental impressions made from Crystal's teeth.
The state's expert on the bite mark, who was so sure about it 10 years ago, now says, you know what? I misinterpreted the data. I was wrong.
I've never seen an expert witness ever recant their testimony at a later time.
Curtis's family was stunned by the reversal.
I do not understand how a scientist can support one thing and say, hey, this is what I support, and then change his mind.
The testimony was enough to convince a judge that Crystal's case should be retried. But would Crystal ever stand trial again? Because in 2016, when the prosecutors started preparing for the retrial, they ran into trouble when they reached out to Joey Stenger, the friend who'd claimed he'd ridden along with Crystal on the night Curtis died.
Stenger's attorney said his client was going to plead the fifth.
And the reason was obvious, according to Crystal's attorney.
He made the whole thing up. He told me, Jeff, I would have told him whatever they wanted me to say. I was looking for a deal, and it didn't matter. I know it's wrong, but the reality is I was willing to say whatever they wanted me to say to help myself.
And with that, the entire case against Crystal collapsed.
The district attorney said, we're just going to dismiss the charges. We don't have the sufficient evidence to proceed.
After 11 years behind bars, Crystal could finally go home.
I was just so overwhelmed and happy that God had finally set me free. I was just so more than overwhelmed and so thankful.
But the victory was bittersweet. Not only had Crystal lost a decade of her life, Curtis's murder remains unsolved.
If Crystal Weimer didn't kill Curtis, his killer is still walking this planet free from this crime.
Which means that for now, all Curtis's family can do is cherish his memory.
And I think he would have did really good things with his life. That's what hurts the most.
And continue to hold out hope that justice will eventually come.
I know this isn't over. I believe in my heart that one day that the truth will be out.
It is finally over for Crystal, though. Almost 40 and finally out of prison, she's making a fresh start.
I'm grateful and happy that the truth set me free and that I'm home. You know, I have each moment to be grateful and thankful for.
Pennsylvania 1992 cold case solved. Unexpected arrest shocks quiet town. No one heard the scream. That was a detail investigators repeated for years, almost as if saying it often enough might change the ending. A quiet town slept beneath a ceiling of low autumn clouds, while a single porch light burned through the darkness on Maple Ridge Road. Inside the modest white farmhouse, a coffee cup still rested on the kitchen table. The radio hummed softly. The front door stood half open. And somewhere between midnight and sunrise, an ordinary life vanished into a mystery that would haunt an entire generation. The first deputy arrived just after dawn. He expected another routine welfare check. Instead, he found silence so complete it felt unnatural. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, but had long gone cold. A chair lay on its side. One picture frame had shattered across the hardwood floor. Nothing else appeared disturbed. No signs of forced entry. No obvious struggle. It looked less like the scene of a violent crime and more like someone had paused reality in the middle of an ordinary morning. Outside, neighbors gathered behind yellow tape, whispering the same questions to one another. How could something so terrible happen here? This was the kind of town where children biked home after dark, where everyone recognized every pickup truck, where strangers were noticed before they reached the center of town. Murders belonged somewhere else. Missing people belonged somewhere else. Evil belonged somewhere else. Yet evil had arrived without warning. Investigators moved carefully through every room. Every drawer remained closed. Jewelry sat untouched inside a bedroom box. Cash rested in plain sight beside a stack of unopened mail. Robbery no longer made sense. The victim had known the killer. Someone suggested quietly. The words drifted to the room like smoke, impossible to grab but impossible to ignore. Then came the first strange discovery. Near the back hallway, almost invisible beneath a thin layer of dust, crime scene technicians located a single fingerprint. It rested on the polished edge of a narrow wooden cabinet where no visitor had any reason to touch. The print was clear, sharp, almost perfect. Detectives smiled for the first time that morning. Fingerprints solved cases. Fingerprints identified strangers. Fingerprints never lied. Except this one seemed to belong to no one. Every available database returned the same answer. No match. The print was photographed, preserved, cataloged, and sealed away with hundreds of other pieces of evidence. Detectives believed they would identify its owner within days. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. As seasons passed, the town changed. New families arrived. Old businesses closed. Children who had watched police cars crowd a road that morning grew into adults with families of their own. Yet the case refused to move. Every anniversary reopened old wounds. Newspapers recycled the same photographs. Television crews returned whenever investigators announced another lead. Every lead collapsed beneath scrutiny. A drifter confessed. He knew details that sounded convincing. He failed a polygraph. His story unraveled within 48 hours. Another suspect emerged after an anonymous letter accused a former boyfriend. Detectives spent months reconstructing timelines, interviewing friends, reviewing financial records. Everything pointed toward suspicion. Nothing reached proof. Another dead end. The evidence room became a graveyard of unanswered questions. Boxes collected dust beneath fluorescent lights. Audio tapes slowly degraded. Interview transcripts yellowed with age. Detectives retired. New detectives inherited the files. Each believed fresh eyes might discover what everyone else had overlooked. Each eventually encountered the same wall. Nothing. The fingerprint remained. Always a fingerprint. Reporters began calling it the ghost print. Some believed the killer had died. Others insisted the murderer had left Pennsylvania forever. Rumors spread faster than facts. One waitress claimed she had served a nervous stranger on the morning after the murder. A truck mechanic insisted he remembered seeing unfamiliar tire tracks near the property. A retired teacher believed she recognized the suspect's silhouette in an old newspaper photograph. Memory became unreliable. Time blurred every detail. The truth drifted farther away. Still, one detective refused to surrender. Every Friday evening, after everyone else left the station, he opened the same worn cardboard box. He spread faded photographs across his desk. He reread interviews he already knew by heart. He traced timelines across yellow legal pads until midnight. His colleagues joked that the case had become an obsession. They were right. He stopped believing closure belonged only to the victim's family. The entire town deserved answers. Then technology changed everything. During the late 2010s, forensic science entered a new era. Fingerprint enhancement software could recover ridge details once thought permanently lost. Artificial intelligence compared prints faster than entire departments had managed over decades. Evidence forgotten inside aging envelopes suddenly became valuable again. The detective requested every surviving piece of physical evidence. Some had deteriorated. Some had disappeared through years of transfers. But the fingerprint remained exactly where technicians had sealed it decades earlier. Protected. Waiting. The laboratory scanned it using equipment unimaginable in 1992. Tiny ridge endings invisible under old magnification emerged with astonishing clarity. Digital reconstruction corrected distortions left by the original lifting tape. The image sharpened until every line appeared almost fresh. The analyst stared at her monitor. She checked the settings, ran the scan again, then submitted the print through the newest national comparison system. Nothing happened at first. Minutes passed. Another analyst walked by without noticing the silence settling over the room. Then the screen flashed. Possible match. Everyone froze. Not a certainty. Not yet. Just enough similarity to demand another examination. The detective received a phone call late that afternoon. He drove to the laboratory without speaking to anyone. Inside, specialists compared ridge characteristics point by point. 12 matched, then 14, then 16. Every confirmation tightened the knot forming inside the detective's chest. After 34 years, the impossible had happened. The ghost finally had a name. No one recognized it. The suspect had never lived in town, never appeared in early interviews, never attracted attention during the original investigation. He had passed through the region for contract work only weeks before the murder, leaving almost no trace behind except one forgotten fingerprint resting silently inside a farmhouse where he claimed he had never been. Detectives immediately searched old employment records. The company no longer existed. Payroll files had been scattered after bankruptcy. Former supervisors had died. Former co-workers had relocated across the country. Every answer produced 3 new questions. The investigation accelerated anyway. Financial records resurfaced. Vehicle registrations emerged from archived state databases. One faded motel receipt placed a suspect within 20 miles of the farmhouse. A handwritten notebook, recovered from a storage unit, listed road names investigators recognized instantly. The quiet town began hearing familiar words once again. Search warrant. Forensic review. Cold case task force. Possible arrest. News helicopters returned. Television trucks lined streets that had almost forgotten what flashing emergency lights looked like. Residents stood on sidewalks watching history reopen before their eyes. Some believed justice had finally arrived. Others feared the truth would prove even darker than decades of rumor. Because every cold case hides 2 stories. The one investigators know, and the one buried beneath years of silence. As detectives prepared to confront the man whose fingerprint had outlived careers, marriages, and entire lifetimes, another discovery surfaced from deep inside the original evidence box. One tiny object overlooked during the first examination, too ordinary to matter in 1992, yet suddenly capable of rewriting everything investigators thought they understood about that impossible autumn morning. The first lie was the silence. It settled over the valley before sunrise, heavy as wet concrete, swallowing the distant bark of dogs, the rustle of dying leaves, even the slow on the highway that usually reached the town like a heartbeat. Every porch light still glowed against the fading darkness. Every window reflected an ordinary morning. Nothing looked broken. Nothing looked wrong. Yet somewhere inside that silence, something had happened that would refuse to stay buried for more than 3 decades. The patrol car rolled onto the gravel driveway at 6:17 a.m., its headlights slicing through a curtain of fog. Deputy Daniel Mercer expected another routine welfare check. An elderly neighbor had reported an open front door. That was all. The dispatcher sounded almost bored when she relayed the call. Routine ended the moment his boots touched the porch. The coffee was still warm. A ceramic mug rested on the kitchen table beside an unfolded newspaper. Steam drifted lazily into the cold air pouring through the half-open doorway. A clock ticked somewhere beyond the hallway. Every sound seemed impossibly loud. Mercer stepped inside. No forced entry. No shattered windows. No overturned furniture. The house looked untouched, as though whoever had entered had been welcomed inside. Then he noticed a chair. One dining chair lay on its side, its wooden leg cracked clean through. Beside it rested a single broken photograph frame. The glass had fractured into dozens of glittering pieces, but the family portrait inside remained strangely intact. For smiling faces stared upward through the cracks, frozen forever in a moment that no longer existed. Mercer reached for his radio. His voice came out lower than he expected. "I need detectives. Now!" Within an hour, the farmhouse transformed into a maze of yellow tape, flashing emergency lights, camera flashes, and whispered conversations. The sleepy road filled with patrol cars. Curious neighbors gathered at the edge of property, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes fixed on the front door as though answers might simply walk out. Questions spread faster than facts. Who found the house? Who had been here last night? Did anyone hear a scream? Did anyone see unfamiliar headlights? Nobody had. That frightened detectives more than anything, because violence usually left echoes. This one left none. Crime scene technicians moved room to room under bright forensic lights. Every surface was photographed, every cabinet opened, every drawer examined. Dust revealed untouched shelves. Fresh footprints were measured, cast, cataloged. A faint smear marked the hallway wall, almost invisible unless viewed from a certain angle. Someone had brushed against it. Not enough for blood. Not enough for certainty. Just enough to suggest movement. Hours passed. The kitchen became a command center covered with evidence bags and handwritten notes. Investigators circled possibilities that collapsed almost as quickly as they appeared. Robbery? Cash remained inside a ceramic jar above the refrigerator. Burglary? Expensive jewelry sat untouched inside a bedroom drawer. Random attack? Nothing about the scene felt random. Every answer dissolved beneath the weight of another contradiction. Then the fingerprint appeared. Tiny. Perfect. Resting on the polished edge of a narrow wooden cabinet near the back hallway. One of the technicians almost missed it. A beam of angled light caught the faint ridge pattern buried beneath a thin layer of dust. Within seconds, the room changed. Cameras repositioned. Brushes emerged. Every conversation stopped. There it was. Clear enough to identify. Clean enough to preserve. Detectives exchanged the first hopeful glance of the day. Fingerprints ended mysteries. Fingerprints spoke when witnesses could not. Fingerprints did not forget. The print was lifted with painstaking care, sealed inside protective film, and rushed to the laboratory before sunset. By morning, optimism had begun to fade. No match. Local records produced nothing. State records produced nothing. Federal databases produced nothing. The unknown print belonged to a ghost. Weeks turned into months. Television stations replayed aerial footage of the isolated farmhouse every anniversary. Reporters stood outside the abandoned property beneath gray winter skies, repeating the same phrases until they became part of the town's identity. Cold case. Unanswered questions. No eres. Community haunted. Children who had watched detectives search the woods grew into adults. The yellow tape disappeared. The farmhouse emptied. Windows darkened. Weeds swallowed the gravel driveway. Rain peeled paint from the walls year after year until the building looked less like a home and more like a monument to unfinished business. Inside police headquarters, however, time stood still. The evidence boxes never moved. Every few years, another detective reopened them, convinced the previous generation had overlooked something obvious. Each reached the same conclusion. Nothing had changed. Nothing except the dust. Then science caught up with history. A forensic analyst lifted the aging fingerprint from its evidence sleeve using imaging equipment unavailable when the case began. High-resolution scanners revealed ridge endings invisible beneath the original photographs. Digital enhancement corrected tiny distortions caused by aging adhesive. The image sharpened one microscopic line at a time until the print looked almost fresh. The analyst leaned closer. Every ridge appeared razor-sharp. Every bifurcation distinct. She submitted the reconstructed print into the newest comparison system. The computer began searching millions of records. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Another. The laboratory remained silent, except for cooling fans humming inside the servers. A notification appeared. Potential identification. The analyst frowned. False positives happened. She reran the search. The same result returned. Again. And again. Now other analysts gathered around the monitor. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to be the first to believe it. A detective received a phone call less than 20 minutes later. He had inherited the file from two retired investigators who once warned him never to become emotionally attached to unsolved cases. Too late. He had memorized every witness statement, every photograph, every contradiction. Now he drove toward the laboratory with one impossible thought echoing through his mind. What if the ghost had finally left a name behind? Outside, rain began falling across the quiet town. Not a storm. Not enough to wash anything away. Just enough to darken the pavement and blur reflections beneath the flashing traffic lights. People hurried through grocery stores. Children climbed onto school buses. Workers unlocked storefronts. No one realized history had just shifted inside a forensic laboratory less than 5 miles away. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives as a single glowing line on a computer screen, carrying a forgotten fingerprint across 30 years of silence before placing it, with terrifying certainty, into the hands of detectives who have waited almost an entire lifetime to ask one final question. Where were you that night? The question lingered in the interrogation room long after the detective finished speaking. Where were you that night? The man did not answer. He simply stared at the scratched metal table between them, expression unreadable, fingers folded together with unsettling calm. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A wall clock ticked once every second, each click stretching the silence tighter. Detective Owen Carter had spent 28 years chasing ghosts. He had interviewed liars who cried on command, grieving husbands who had double lives, drifters who confessed to crimes they never committed simply to taste the attention of television cameras. He had learned that innocence rarely looked innocent and guilt almost never announced itself. But this silence, this was different. It wasn't panic. It wasn't outrage. It was calculation. Across the table lay a single transparent evidence sleeve. Inside rested the fingerprint that had survived decades longer than memories. Carter pushed it forward without saying another word. The man's eyes dropped for only an instant. That was enough. The movement lasted less than half a second, but seasoned investigators noticed what ordinary people never see. A tightening of the jaw, a brief pause in breathing, pupils narrowing before returning to normal. Fear rarely shouted. It whispered. "You've never been inside that farmhouse," Carter said quietly. "That's what you maintained since the beginning." No response. "You told investigators you had never met the family." Silence. "You said you drove through town once and never came back." Still nothing. Carter opened another folder. Inside were faded photographs from the original investigation. Their colors had yellowed with age. The edges had curled. Time had tried to erase them. It had failed. This picture was taken at 8:42 that morning. He slid the photograph across the table. A broken chair. A cracked picture frame. Coffee still steaming from a ceramic mug. Your fingerprint wasn't on the front door. Another photograph. It wasn't in the kitchen. Another. It wasn't on a window. Another. It was here. The hallway. The narrow cabinet. The one place nobody had any reason to touch. The suspect finally spoke. "I don't remember." 4 words. Soft. Almost casual. Yet the room changed instantly. Because "I don't remember" was no longer denial. It was an admission that memory existed. Outside the interview room, prosecutors exchanged uneasy glances. The case remained fragile. A fingerprint placed someone at the scene. It did not explain why. It did not explain when. It certainly did not explain what happened after midnight inside a quiet farmhouse, where every clock had stopped telling the truth. Investigators expanded the timeline again. Every receipt. Every fuel purchase. Every motel registry. Every pay stub. Thousands of forgotten documents returned from archives that smelled of dust and cardboard. An analyst uncovered something astonishing. A payroll ledger from a construction company listed an address the suspect had visited only 2 days before the crime, less than 3 miles from the farmhouse. Another investigator found an insurance claim involving a pickup truck matching witness descriptions recorded 30 years earlier. Individually, the discoveries meant little. Together, they formed a pattern. Patterns solve cases. Rumors never do. News spread through the town before sunset. Television vans appeared once more. Satellite dishes unfolded beside courthouse steps. Reporters rehearsed opening lines while producers counted down to live broadcasts. Residents gathered in cafes and barbershops, speaking in lowered voices. Some believed justice had finally arrived. Others warned against celebrating too soon. Time had taught the town to distrust certainty. For 30 years, they had watched promising leads dissolve into disappointment. Nobody wanted hope to become another victim. That evening, Carter returned to the abandoned farmhouse alone. No cameras. No deputies. Only fading daylight filtering through broken windows. Dust drifted through the air like tiny ghosts. The floorboards groaned beneath every step. He stood in the hallway where the fingerprint had been discovered. One hand rested against the same cabinet. The wood felt cold. He closed his eyes and imagined the room as it had once been. Fresh paint, family photographs, laughter, the smell of dinner, a radio playing softly from a kitchen. Then, a knock at the door. A familiar face. No alarm. No fear. The kind of visitor invited inside without hesitation. Something changed. Voices grew louder. A disagreement. A sudden movement. One chair overturned. Glass shattered. Someone stumbled into the hallway, reaching instinctively toward the cabinet for balance. One hand remained there for only a heartbeat, long enough to leave behind a fingerprint, long enough to survive 30 years. Carter opened his eyes. It was only a theory. But for the first time, it felt like one that breathed. Back at the laboratory, another surprise emerged. Technicians re-examined microscopic fibers preserved inside an evidence envelope that nobody had opened in decades. Modern imaging revealed synthetic material uncommon in the early 1990s, but frequently used by one regional industrial supplier. Records showed only a handful of employers purchased that material. One of them had hired the suspect. The investigation accelerated. Search warrants, financial subpoenas, old storage lockers, boxes forgotten inside garages. Every new discovery tightened the circle. Then, just as momentum seemed unstoppable, detectives received an anonymous phone call. The voice was electronically distorted. "You've got the wrong story," it said. Not, "You've got the wrong man, the wrong story." Before investigators could respond, the line went dead. They traced the call. Disposable phone, purchased with cash, already discarded. Another ghost. But ghosts leave echoes. Carter replayed the recording again and again. One sentence. 5 words. "You got the wrong story." He couldn't shake the feeling that whoever called wasn't trying to stop the investigation. They were trying to redirect it. He returned to the evidence room. Before midnight, rows of cardboard boxes surrounded him in the dim light. Thousands of forgotten cases. Thousands of lives suspended between certainty and doubt. He retrieved the oldest evidence log from the shelf. Handwritten. Faded. Nearly illegible. Halfway down the page, a single line caught his attention. Item 47, not submitted. No explanation. No initials. No destination. Just 4 words written by someone long retired. He searched the box again. Evidence bag after evidence bag. Nothing labeled Item 47. Nothing missing. Nothing obvious. Until he lifted the false bottom of the aging cardboard container. Hidden beneath it lay a small brown envelope sealed with brittle tape. No one had opened it in more than 3 decades. Carter stared at the faded handwriting across its surface. His pulse quickened. Because sometimes the most important evidence in a cold case isn't the fingerprint everyone remembers. Sometimes it's the evidence nobody realized had disappeared. Rain erased footprints almost as quickly as they appeared. By the time the first patrol unit reached Blackwater Bridge, the storm had transformed the narrow county road into a ribbon of shining asphalt. Red and blue emergency lights pulsed against the steel beams, reflecting across the swollen river below like warning signals trapped beneath the current. Wind howled through the empty structure, carrying with it the metallic rattle of loose guardrails and the distant crack of thunder rolling across the hills. The dispatcher had received only 6 words. Someone left a car on the bridge. Nothing more. No panique. No explanation. Just silence after the call disconnected. Deputy Sarah Nolan stepped from her cruiser and immediately sensed something was wrong. Abandoned vehicles were common. Mechanical failures happened every week, but drivers usually remained nearby, waiting for help. This driver had vanished. The sedan sat perfectly centered in the eastbound lane, engine cold, headlights still burning into the rain. The driver's door stood open exactly 12 inches, rocking gently whenever the wind surged through the bridge. Water collected inside the footwell, dripping steadily onto the pavement. No guolit, no phone, no keys. Only a half-finished bottle of water resting in the cup holder and a cassette tape still spinning inside the dashboard player, the magnetic ribbon hissing through worn speakers after the music had ended. Detective Lucas Hayes arrived 23 minutes later. He didn't look at the car first. He looked at the road behind it. Years of homicide investigations had taught him a simple rule. People always watch the obvious. Truth usually waited somewhere else. He walked 50 yards back through the rain, flashlights sweeping across the glistening pavement. Tire tracks overlapped one another in muddy gravel near the shoulder, but one pattern refused to fit. A second vehicle had stopped behind the sedan, only briefly, before pulling away again. Fresh. Straight. Deliberate. No signs of skidding. No attempt to conceal its presence. Almost as if whoever had been there wanted investigators to notice. Crime scene technicians photographed every inch of the bridge while divers prepared below. The river churned beneath them, swollen by days of relentless rain. Visibility measured less than a foot. If someone had gone into that water, the current would decide where they were found, or whether they were found at all. Hours passed. Nothing. No body. No witnesses. No emergency calls from passing motorists. Traffic cameras captured the sedan arriving at 10:41 p.m. No camera recorded anyone leaving. News helicopters circled overhead by sunrise. Television anchors called it another mysterious disappearance. Social media filled with theories before investigators completed their first evidence inventory. Some claimed the driver had staged an escape. Others insisted organized criminals were involved. Amateur detectives slowed the video frame by frame, convinced they could identify shadowy figures hidden inside the storm. Facts drowned beneath speculation. They always did. Back at the forensic laboratory, technicians processed the abandoned sedan under powerful white lights. Every fingerprint, every fiber, every strand of hair. Most belonged exactly where they should. One did not. A faint palm impression stretched across the inside edge of the passenger window. It had been left from the outside. Someone had pressed both hands against the glass. Not to enter, not to escape, to look inside. The rain should have destroyed it, yet somehow it remained. The laboratory supervisor stared at the impression for several seconds before speaking. Whoever left this wasn't wearing gloves. Silence filled the room. Experienced investigators knew what that meant. Either the person had never expected police to find the vehicle, or they wanted detectives to know they had been there. Neither possibility offered comfort. Detective Hayes ordered every available camera within 20 miles reviewed again, frame by frame, second by second. Hours became days. Then an analyst noticed something almost impossible to see. 3 minutes before the sedan reached the bridge, another vehicle appeared in the far distance of one traffic camera. Only headlights. No license plate. No body detail. Just two pale circles floating through the rain. The distance between the vehicles never changed. Every turn, every intersection, every mile, someone had been following, not aggressively, not closely, patiently, like a hunter who already knew exactly where the road ended. Investigators reconstructed the route using fuel receipts, highway sensors, and private security footage from convenience stores. The same unidentified headlights surfaced again and again, always just far enough behind to avoid attention. Coincidence slowly transformed into intent. The bridge was never the beginning. It was the destination. Late one evening, Hayes returned alone after media left. The storm had passed. The river flowed quietly beneath the skies scattered with stars. He stood where the abandoned sedan had waited, listening to insects sing beyond the guardrails. Without flashing lights, without helicopters, without reporters. The bridge felt strangely peaceful, too peaceful. He closed his eyes and imagined the final moments. A car slowing to a stop. Another vehicle arriving seconds later. Two people stepping into the darkness. A conversation no one would ever hear. No screaming. No struggle. Only the river carrying away every answer before sunrise. Then something caught his eye, near one rusted support beam, almost hidden beneath years of chipped paint. Someone had carved a tiny symbol into the steel. Not graffiti. Not initials. A precise geometric mark no larger than a coin. Fresh. Sharp. Intentional. Crime scene officers had photographed the entire bridge. None of the images mentioned it. Hayes traced the carving gently with one fingertip. The groove still felt rough. Whoever made it hadn't been marking territory. They'd been leaving a message. The question was chillingly simple. For whom? Hayes didn't call anyone. Not yet. Years in homicide had taught him that the first person to touch a forgotten clue often destroyed the second one without realizing it. He crouched beside the weather support beam, sweeping his flashlight slowly across the steel. The carving looked deliberate, cut with a sharp blade rather than scratched by accident. Rainwater clung to its edges, making the symbol glisten beneath the pale beam of light. A triangle. A single vertical line passing through its center. Nothing more. No letters. No numbers. No obvious meaning. He photographed it from every angle before carefully measuring its exact height above the pavement. 54 inches. Too high to have been carved casually by someone walking past. Whoever made it had stood still. They had taken their time. The detective stepped backward. The bridge suddenly felt different. Crime scenes rarely ended where police believed they ended. They expanded outward like ripples across dark water, swallowing forgotten details, until every overlooked object demanded another question. He scanned the roadway again. Fresh asphalt patches, old tire marks, rust creeping across bolts that hadn't been replaced in years. Then something caught the corner of his eye, a tiny reflection beneath the guardrail. Not glass. Metal. He slipped on a pair of gloves and reached underneath. His fingers closed around a silver cufflink. Plain. Elegant. Heavy. The engraved initials had almost disappeared beneath years of exposure, but under the flashlight they became barely visible. M.R. Hayes stared at the object for several seconds. It shouldn't have survived. Snow. Then salt trucks. Thousands of passing vehicles. Everything should have carried it away long ago. Yet somehow it had remained trapped beneath the steel, hidden from sight until now. Back at the laboratory, forensic specialists worked through the night. The cuff link carried microscopic scratches, fragments of blue automotive paint, a single strand of dark synthetic fiber lodged inside its hinge. No juiceable fingerprints, no DNA visible to the naked eye. Still, modern technology had a way of finding voices where older investigations heard only silence. While technicians processed the evidence, Hayes reopened every witness interview connected to the abandoned sedan. One statement refused to leave his mind. A truck driver had reported seeing someone standing by the bridge roughly 20 minutes before the emergency call. The original investigators dismissed him. Heavy rain. Poor visibility. Long hours behind the wheel. They believed fatigue had distorted his memory. Hayes believed something else. He requested the driver's complete interview recording. The audio crackled through aging speakers. You said you saw one person? Yeah. Were you sure? No. What do you mean? I thought it was one, until the lightning. The detective paused the recording, rewound, played it again, until the lightning. He continued listening. For maybe a second, I saw another shape behind the guardrail. Then it was gone. The interviewer never asked another question about it. Instead, they moved to vehicle descriptions, license plates, weather, traffic. The second figure disappeared into the paperwork as though it had never existed. Hayes leaned back in his chair. The bridge had held more than one secret. The following afternoon, divers returned to the river with upgraded sonar equipment. The current had weakened after several dry days. Visibility improved. A slow sweep beneath the central span revealed scattered debris, shopping carts, broken branches, scrap metal. Then, a rectangular object resting against submerged rocks. Divers descended. Minutes later, they surfaced carrying a weathered steel toolbox sealed shut by corrosion. Every conversation stopped. The box was transported directly to the forensic lab. Technicians opened it under controlled conditions. Inside lay dozens of water-damaged papers fused together into solid blocks. Most were unreadable. One survived. A folded road map. Red ink circled 3 locations. The bridge. An abandoned grain elevator 40 miles north. A quarry closed nearly 15 years earlier. No explanation. No names. Just 3 circles connected by a hand-drawn line. Hayes spread the map across the conference table. Coincidence no longer seemed possible. Within hours, search teams reached the abandoned grain elevator. Wind whistled through broken windows. Rusted machinery stood frozen beneath layers of dust. Pigeons scattered into the air as officers entered the massive structure. Flashlights swept across cracked concrete. Nothing. Then an officer noticed recent footprints in the dust. Not fresh. Not old. Weeks, perhaps months. Someone had been inside long after everyone else forgot the place existed. The tracks led upstairs, across a narrow metal walkway, toward an office overlooking the empty warehouse floor. Inside the office, investigators found almost nothing. A broken desk, collapsed filing cabinets, fragments of shattered glass, and on the far wall, the same symbol. The triangle, the vertical line, carved with identical precision. Hayes felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. 2 locations. Same mark. Same deliberate craftsmanship. Someone wanted these places connected. The question wasn't why. It was what waited at the 3rd location. By sunset, the task force assembled outside the abandoned quarry. The entrance road had disappeared beneath weeds. Heavy equipment lay scattered where workers had abandoned it years before. Towering stone walls surrounded pools of black water that reflected the fading sky. The silence felt unnatural. Search teams advanced carefully. Metal detectors swept the ground. Drones circled overhead. For nearly 2 hours, nothing appeared. Then one operator called everyone to a halt. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a large rectangular anomaly beneath a collapsed maintenance shed. Not bedrock. Not natural soil. Something had been buried there. Excavation began immediately. Every shovel of earth heightened the tension. The first object uncovered was a length of rusted chain, then a wooden board, then another. Finally, the outline of a carefully constructed crate emerged from the darkness. Nobody spoke. Cameras rolled. Flashlights converged. Hayes removed his gloves, took a slow breath, and looked at the weathered lid. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide whatever rested inside. The real mystery was no longer whether the abandoned car had been connected to a crime. The real mystery was how many crimes had remained hidden beneath the same trail of symbols, waiting for someone patient enough to follow them. No one moved. The excavation lights flooded the abandoned quarry with harsh white beams, turning drifting dust into glittering clouds. Wind swept across the open pit, carrying the distant groan of loose steel cables that had not moved in years. Every officer stood frozen around the partially exposed crate, waiting for someone else to break the silence first. Detective Hayes stepped forward. Photographs first. The command snapped everyone back to work. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession. Every angle, every nail, every splinter in the weathered wood. The crate measured just under 6 feet long and barely 3 feet wide. Handmade, reinforced from the inside. Whoever buried it had expected it to remain hidden for a very long time. A forensic technician ran a portable scanner across the surface. No explosive signature. Another checked for chemical hazards. Negative. Hayes nodded. Pried open. The sound echoed across the quarry. Metal scraped against old wood. One nail pulled free. Then another. The lid resisted as though the earth itself refused to surrender its secret. Finally, with one violent crack. The boards lifted apart. Everyone leaned closer. Inside, nothing. No body, no weapon. Only dozens of carefully stacked cassette tapes wrapped in thick plastic. The disappointment lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Hayes realized what he was looking at. Each cassette carried a handwritten date, month, day, year. The earliest label was nearly 30 years old. The latest had been recorded less than 6 months before the abandoned sedan appeared on Blackwater Bridge. Someone had been documenting something. For decades, the evidence was rushed to the forensic laboratory before sunrise. Specialists dried each cassette inside climate-controlled chambers before attempting playback. The magnetic tape had survived surprisingly well. At 9:14 a.m., the first recording began. Static. Wind. Footsteps crunching across gravel. Then, a man's voice. Calm. Measured. Almost conversational. If you're hearing this, it means someone finally found the first box. The room fell silent. Nobody touched the controls. The recording continued. I wonder how long it would take. 5 years? 10? Longer? Doesn't matter now. Another pause. I've spent my life watching people search in the wrong places. A chair creaks somewhere in the background. You always look for the body. Hayes exchanged a glance with the audio analyst. The speaker almost sounded amused. But bodies disappear. A soft laugh. Stories don't. Click. The tape ended. No names. No confession. No explanation. Just 48 seconds that changed the direction of the investigation. Technicians immediately digitized every remaining cassette. There were 53 in total. Some contained only ambient sounds. Others captured conversations that seemed meaningless at first. Traffic, weather reports playing on distant radios, clocks chiming midnight. Yet a pattern slowly emerged. Every recording included one constant. A bell. Sometimes faint. Sometimes overwhelming. Always exactly 7 chimes. Hayes ordered investigators to identify every church, courthouse, school, and clock tower within a 100-mile radius capable of producing that distinctive sequence. The list began with 92 locations. By evening, it had narrowed to 14. 3 days later, only one remained. St. Alden's Mission, a stone church standing alone outside a nearly abandoned farming community. The bell tower had been silent for years, or so everyone believed. When detectives arrived, Father Michael greeted them with visible confusion. No one has rung those bells since the restoration failed. Can we see the tower? The elderly priest hesitated, then quietly unlocked the narrow wooden door. Dust coated every step leading upward. Spiderwebs stretched between ancient beams. Nothing suggested recent visitors. Until Hayes reached the bell platform, the dust ended. Fresh footprints crossed the floor. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. The detective followed the prints toward the eastern window overlooking the valley. A small brass key rested on a stone ledge. Attached to it was a weathered luggage tag. Locker 214. Union Station. No city. No state. Just a number. The task force searched transportation records throughout the region. Only one station still used lockers matching that numbering system. The building sat nearly 200 miles away. By midnight, Hayes stood inside a nearly deserted terminal where trains arrived every few hours and strangers rarely remembered one another. Locker 214 waited near the far wall. The key turned smoothly. Inside rested a plain cardboard box. Nothing fancy. Nothing dramatic. Just ordinary office supplies. Folders. Receipts. Newspaper clippings. A disposable camera. And beneath everything else, a sealed envelope. Across the front, someone had written 5 words. Don't trust the timeline. Hayes opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white. Grainy. Taken from a distance. It showed Blackwater Bridge on the very night The sedan had been abandoned. The timestamp matched the official investigation. The weather matched. The position of the vehicle matched. Everything matched, except for one impossible detail. There wasn't one car on the bridge. There were two. The second vehicle had been parked beneath the shadow of the western support, where every responding officer, every television camera, and every witness had failed to notice it. The image was enlarged, pixel by pixel. Its outline slowly sharpened. An older pickup truck, dark paint, damaged front bumper. No readable license plate, but taped to the back window. The same triangular symbol. Hayes felt the investigation shifting beneath his feet. For months, everyone had assumed the abandoned sedan was the mystery. It wasn't. The sedan had been a message. The pickup had been a real story. Back at headquarters, detectives reconstructed every official timeline created during the original investigation. Arrival times, witness statements, emergency calls, radio traffic. One inconsistency surfaced almost immediately. The anonymous 911 call, reporting the abandoned car, had been placed 4 minutes before the sedan appeared on the nearest traffic camera. For minutes. Impossible. Someone had reported a vehicle before any camera captured it arriving. There were only two explanations. Either the camera timestamps were wrong, or whoever made the call already knew exactly what was about to happen. The room fell silent. Hayes stared at the wall-sized caseboard covered with photographs, maps, and red string connecting dozens of unrelated clues. Bridge. Quarry. Church. Locker. Cassette tapes. The pickup. The impossible phone call. For weeks the investigation had felt like a straight line. Now it resembled a maze. Somewhere inside that maze, someone had anticipated every move investigators would make decades before they made it. And if that was true, the next clue wasn't waiting to be discovered. It had been planted patiently for someone clever enough to notice it. The conference room lights remained on long after midnight. Photographs covered every wall. Maps stretched across folding tables. Colored pins marked locations that, only days earlier, had appeared completely unrelated. Blackwater Bridge, the abandoned quarry, St. Alden's Mission, Union Station, for places separated by miles of empty roads and forgotten towns, yet somehow connected by a single symbol carved into steel, stone, and silence. Hayes stood in the center of the room. He stopped looking at the evidence. Instead, he looked at the spaces between it. Experienced investigators eventually learn that cases rarely collapse because evidence disappears. They collapse because everyone accepts the first logical sequence of events. Once a timeline becomes official, every new discovery is forced to fit inside it. The anonymous envelope had challenged exactly that. Don't trust the timeline. Those 4 words refused to leave his mind. He walked toward the largest map. Red string connected the bridge to the quarry. Another line ran from the quarry to the church. Another reached Union Station. The pattern looked convincing. Too convincing. Hayes pulled every pin from the board. The strings dropped to the floor. Gasps echoed through the room. "What are you doing?" one detective asked. "We're starting over." Silence. No assumptions. He gathered every photograph into a single pile. No sequence. He stacked every witness statement. No theory. The room watched without speaking. For 30 years, Hayes continued, everyone has tried proving what they already believed. He looked around the room. What if every one of us inherited the same mistake? Nobody answered, because nobody could. Within an hour, the investigation changed direction completely. Instead of asking where the missing driver had gone, investigators asked who benefited from making everyone search for the driver. Instead of asking why the bridge mattered, they asked who wanted the bridge to matter. The difference seemed small. It changed everything. A forensic accountant reviewing decades-old banking records uncovered an unusual pattern. Tiny cash withdrawals, always below reporting limits, always made on the 7th day of each month, always from different towns, individually meaningless, collectively impossible to ignore. The account belonged to a man who had officially died 12 years earlier. His death certificate appeared legitimate. Hospital records confirmed it. Funeral records confirmed it. Insurance records confirmed it. Even the cemetery confirmed it. Hayes visited the grave personally. The headstone stood beneath an aging oak tree. Fresh flowers rested at its base despite there being no surviving relatives listed in probate records. Someone still visited. Someone who wanted the world to believe the man beneath the stone had never left. Ground-penetrating radar arrived the following morning. The cemetery staff protested. Court orders settled the argument. The scan completed in less than 15 minutes. Every grave produced the same image, except one. The coffin beneath the oak tree measured almost 18 inches shorter than the burial permit described. Hayes didn't need anyone to explain what that meant. The grave was open before sunset. News helicopters circled overhead. Television crews lined the entrance road. The nation watched as workers carefully lifted the weathered lid from a coffin sealed more than a decade earlier. Inside, no body, just bags of sand, perfectly arranged to match the weight recorded on official burial paperwork. A collective silence swept across the cemetery. Someone had staged an entire funeral. The question spread through the investigation like wildfire. Who buries an empty coffin? Fingerprint specialists processed every surface. Most prints belonged to funeral workers. One partial print appeared on the underside of the coffin lid. Too small for identification. Too incomplete for certainty. Yet enough to prove one thing. Someone had opened the coffin after burial. Hayes barely had time to return to headquarters before another development arrived. The audio laboratory had finished enhancing the background noise hidden inside the oldest cassette recording. Most listeners heard only wind. Computers heard something else. A diesel locomotive. 3 short horn blasts. Then a station announcement. The words were nearly impossible to understand until software removed decades of distortion. Track 4. Delayed. Track 4. Union Station no longer had a track 4. It had been demolished 22 years earlier during renovations, which meant the recording had been made before reconstruction. The voice on the cassette had intentionally left an acoustic timestamp, not a date, a place in history. Hayes smiled for the first time in days. He's been leaving breadcrumbs. The analyst looked up. He wanted someone to solve this. But why wait 30 years? Another detective asked. Hayes looked toward the evidence board. Maybe he wasn't waiting. He paused. Maybe new technology would eventually catch up. The room fell quiet again. That possibility was more unsettling than any confession. It suggested planning measured not in weeks or months, but in decades. Investigators returned to Union Station armed with architectural blueprints from before the renovation. Track 4 had once ended beside a maintenance tunnel, now sealed behind concrete. City officials insisted the tunnel had collapsed years ago. Construction records told another story. It had been intentionally closed. No explanation. No engineering report. Just a signature autorising permanent sealing. The signature belonged to a municipal engineer who disappeared 8 months after approving the work. Declared missing. Never found. The maintenance wall was opened under court supervision. Concrete dust filled the air. Piece by piece the barrier disappeared. Behind it stretched a narrow brick corridor untouched for years. Old electrical wiring hung from the ceiling. Rust covered abandoned equipment. Everything appeared frozen in time. Then one officer noticed footprints. Not old. Fresh enough to retain clear tread patterns in the dust. Someone had entered recently. Hayes followed them slowly. Every step echoed through the tunnel. 50 yards. 75. 100. The corridor widened into an abandoned service room where forgotten filing cabinets stood beneath broken fluorescent fixtures. Most drawers were empty. One remained locked. Bolt cutters snapped the corroded padlock. Inside rested dozens of reel-to-reel audio tapes carefully labeled by year. 1989, 1990, 1991, 1992, 1993, The dates continued uninterrupted, nearly 3 decades of recordings, each preserved inside airtight containers. A technician lifted one carefully. Someone wanted these found. Hayes nodded. No. He looked around the silent room. They wanted them to survive. At that exact moment, far above the tunnel, a maintenance worker repairing station security cameras noticed a dark SUV pulling away from the employee parking lot. Nothing unusual, except the driver had remained parked there for nearly 4 hours, watching the entrance. By the time officers reached the lot, the vehicle was gone. Security cameras captured only one clear image, a silhouette behind tinted glass, one gloved hand resting on the steering wheel, and taped inside the rear window, the same triangular symbol, not a relic, not history. Someone was still playing the game. Someone had been watching every move the investigation made. And for the first time since the abandoned sedan appeared on Blackwater Bridge, Detective Hayes understood the most dangerous truth of all. The mystery wasn't over. The person writing it was still alive. The realization settled over the task force like a winter fog. Every clue they had uncovered, every hidden recording, every abandoned location, every impossible coincidence. None of it belonged entirely to the past. Someone was still moving, still watching, still staying one step ahead. The surveillance image from Union Station was enlarged until the pixels began to dissolve. Technicians enhanced reflection on the SUV's side window. The license plate remained unreadable. The driver's face disappeared behind darkness. Yet one detail survived every enhancement. A wristwatch. Old. Round. Distinctive. Not expensive. Not modern. A mechanical field watch with a cracked luminous dial. Hayes recognized it instantly, not because of the watch itself, because he had seen it before. He hurried toward the evidence archive, pulling open drawer after drawer until he found a stack of photographs recovered from the abandoned quarry. One image showed the inside of the wooden crate before the cassette tapes had been removed. There, resting beneath the final row of tapes, the same watch, only this one had stopped forever. The hands pointed to 217. The watch in the surveillance photo was still running. The room fell silent. Someone had returned to retrieve it, or someone owned its twin. Either possibility shattered another assumption. The quarry had not been abandoned after all. It had been visited long after investigators believed it forgotten. Within hours, officers established covert surveillance around every known location connected to the case. No flashing lights, no marked patrol cars, only unmarked vehicles tucked beneath tree lines and abandoned service roads. Night settled over Blackwater County. The bridge disappeared beneath drifting mist. The quarry became a black scar against the hills. St. Alden's bell tower stood motionless beneath the sky, crowded with stars. At 1:43 a.m., a radio crackled. Movement at the church. Hayes accelerated before the dispatcher finished speaking. By the time he arrived, officers had already surrounded the property. The ancient wooden door stood open. Fresh, muddy footprints crossed the stone floor toward the bell tower. No forced entry. No signs of panic. Whoever entered knew exactly where they were going. The team climbed carefully. Each stair groaned beneath their boots. Halfway up, Hayes raised a fist. Everyone stopped. A faint metallic sound drifted from above. Not machinery. A bell rope. Moving. Slowly. One swing. Then another. No Welsrand. The clapper had been removed years earlier. Only the rope continued its silent motion. Hayes pushed open the trapdoor. The tower was empty. Cold air swept through broken windows. Moonlight spilled across old timber beams. The rope still swayed gently. Someone had been there seconds earlier. One officer searched the corners. Another inspected the staircase. Nothing. Then Hayes noticed a folded sheet of paper tucked beneath a loose floorboard. He unfolded it carefully. No fingerprints. No handwriting. Only a typed sentence. You're finally asking the right questions. No signature. No date. No demand. Just those 6 words. The message should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt like permission. Back at headquarters, the paper underwent every forensic test available. No DNA. No fibers unique enough to trace. The printer ink matched thousands of commercially available cartridges. Whoever left it understood forensic science remarkably well. They knew exactly what not to leave behind. As dawn approached, exhaustion settled across the investigation. Coffee cups multiplied. Case boards expanded. Maps became crowded with annotations. Yet the answers remained just beyond reach. Hayes walked alone into the briefing room. He stared at the largest map in silence, not looking for places, looking for timing. The bridge, the quarry, the church, Union Station. Every clue had appeared only after investigators solved the previous one, not before. Someone wasn't hiding evidence. Someone was releasing it, deliberately, patiently, like chapters in a book. A young intelligence analyst looked up from her computer. Detective. Hayes turned. I think I found something. She rotated her monitor. On the screen was a timeline of every anonymous message, every hidden recording, every newly discovered clue. She highlighted the intervals. 32 days. 32 days. 32 days. Every discovery had occurred exactly 32 days after the previous one. Not approximately. Exactly. The room became unnervingly quiet. That can't be coincidence, someone whispered. Hayes slowly nodded. No. He looked back at the calendar pinned beside the evidence board. When's the next 32nd day? The analyst typed rapidly. Her expression changed. It's tomorrow. Nobody spoke. Tomorrow. Whatever game had been unfolding for decades, it wasn't over. It had a schedule. Hayes glanced once more at the typed note, recovered from the bell tower. You're finally asking the right questions. For the first time since the abandoned sedan appeared on Blackwater Bridge, he stopped wondering who had committed the crime. Instead, one darker thought refused to leave him. What if the person orchestrating every clue didn't want to escape? What if they had been carefully leading investigators towards something far larger than a single disappearance? And tomorrow was the day they intended everyone to finally see it? Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of cold steel. No one in the task force spoke about the date. They didn't need to. Every clock inside headquarters seemed louder than usual. Every ringing phone pulled eyes toward the calendar pinned beside the evidence board. 32 days had passed since the discovery at the bell tower. If the pattern held, something would happen before midnight. The question was no longer whether another clue would appear. It was where. Detective Hayes divided the investigation into 4 teams. One returned to Blackwater Bridge. Another watched the abandoned quarry from concealed observation posts hidden among the pines. A third remained inside Union Station, blending into the endless flow of commuters. Hayes chose the church, not because evidence suggested it, because instinct did. The old stone building stood exactly as he remembered, empty pews, dust floating through narrow beams of sunlight. Candles burned halfway down to melted pools of wax left by visitors who had long since forgotten why they came. Silence ruled the sanctuary, until one bell rang. Just once. Hayes froze. The tower had no working clapper. He knew that. Every officer knew that. Yet the sound echoed through the valley with startling clarity. His radio exploded with overlapping voices. Bridge team to command. We heard it too. Quarry team confirms. Union Station heard the bell. Impossible. For locations. Miles apart. One bell. Hayes sprinted toward the staircase leading into the tower. 2 officers followed close behind. The wooden steps trembled beneath their weight. He pushed open the trapdoor. Empty. Again. Only the rope swayed gently in the stale air. This time, however, something rested on the floor beneath it. A portable cassette player. Old. Weathered. Its play button already pressed. The reels turned slowly. Static filled the room. Then a voice emerged, clearer than any previous recording. If you're standing here. A pause. You're exactly where I expected. Hayes exchanged a glance with a forensic technician already photographing the device. The voice continued. You're still looking for a killer. Soft laughter drifted through the speaker. You should be looking for a witness. The tape clicked. Silence. Nothing else. No explanation. No names. Only another impossible sentence. Back at headquarters, analysts replayed the recording dozens of times. Background noise became their obsession. A faint hum. Wind. Distant machinery. Then one audio specialist isolated something almost hidden beneath the speaker's voice. A train crossing signal. 3 rapid warning bells. A diesel horn. Hayes looked up. Union Station? The analyst shook his head. No. He enlarged the waveform. The horn pattern doesn't match passenger rail. Another comparison. Freight locomotives. Industrial lines. Private rail yards. Hours later, the software returned one likely source. An abandoned freight depot 20 miles outside town, closed since the late 1990s. By sunset, the task force surrounded the sprawling complex. Rust covered every rail. Broken freight cars had abandoned beneath towering weeds. The control tower leaned slightly to one side as though years of neglect had finally become too heavy. Search teams entered cautiously. Flashlights swept across cracked concrete floors littered with shattered glass. One building after another revealed nothing. Empty offices. Collapsed roofs. Rotting paperwork. Dead ends. Then Officer Ramirez called over the radio. I've got something. Everyone converged on Warehouse 3. Near the rear loading dock stood an enormous wall map mounted inside a rusted metal frame. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Old shipping routes, rail connections, industrial facilities. Then Hayes noticed dozens of tiny pinholes scattered across its surface. Someone had marked locations, removed the pins, left only the holes behind. Crime scene photographers documented every inch before the map was removed. Back at headquarters, analysts overlaid the pinhole locations onto modern satellite imagery. Most matched abandoned places investigators had already visited. Bridge, church, quarry, station. But 5 remained unidentified. Hayes circled them in red. 5 locations still waiting. 5 places a mysterious planner had intended someone to discover. His phone vibrated. Private number. He answered without speaking. The line remained silent for several seconds. Then came a calm voice. Older. Measured. You found the warehouse. Hayes signaled for the call to be traced. Technicians immediately went to work. Who is this? You've improved. Where are you? A faint chuckle. It took your predecessors years to notice the pattern. The detective kept his breathing steady. What do you want? Another pause. I want you to stop asking who. Hayes looked toward the evidence board. Then what should I ask? The answer came immediately. Ask why someone would spend 30 years leaving clues, instead of destroying them. Click. The line went dead. The trace failed. Disposable routing. Encrypted relays. Gone. Yet the voice had revealed something far more valuable than location. It sounded tired. Not frightened. Not excited. Simply tired. As though the speaker had been carrying a burden for longer than anyone could imagine. Late that night, Hayes returned alone to Warehouse 3. Floodlights illuminated the empty rail yard. The wind carried the smell of rust and wet earth through broken loading bays. He stood before the bare wall, where the map had hung only hours earlier. Something felt wrong. He couldn't explain it. Investigators often spoke about instinct as though it were magic. It wasn't. Instinct was simply thousands of forgotten observations assembling themselves into one unavoidable feeling. He shined his flashlight across the bolts that once held the map. 4 bolts. 3 coated with decades of corrosion. 1 bright, recently disturbed. Hayes touched it carefully. It turned beneath his fingers. The entire steel panel shifted outward by less than an inch. A hidden compartment. He stepped back. Evidence team. Minutes later, technicians carefully removed the panel. Behind it rested a narrow cavity no wider than a briefcase. Inside lay a leather journal wrapped in wax canvas, perfectly preserved. The cover bore no title, no initials, no identifying marks, only the same triangular symbol stamped into the leather in faded silver ink. Hayes opened the first page. Every officer leaned closer. The handwriting was precise, deliberate. The first sentence filled the page. If you're reading this, it means I have failed, and the person I was trying to stop is still alive. At 3:11 a.m., the city forgot how to breathe. Fog rolled through the empty streets in slow waves, swallowing storefronts, traffic signs, and abandoned payphones until the world became nothing more than pools of pale light floating in darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train sounded its horn, long and mournful, before disappearing into the silence. Detective Evelyn Shaw hated nights like this, not because they were quiet, because they never stayed that way. Her phone vibrated once. Unknown number. No caller ID. She answered without speaking. For several seconds, all she heard was static. Then a calm voice, old enough to carry experience but young enough to hide regret, whispered only one sentence. You're standing exactly where the first mistake was made. The line went dead. No threat. No explanation. Just silence. Shaw looked around. She was alone beneath a flickering street lamp outside the long-abandoned Harrow textile mill. The building had been condemned nearly 20 years earlier after a fire gutted its upper floors. Windows were boarded shut. Brick walls sagged beneath decades of rain. The city planned to demolish it every year. Somehow, it never happened. She crossed the empty parking lot slowly. Broken glass cracked beneath her boots. The air smelled of rust, wet concrete, and burned timber that should have lost its scent decades ago. Her flashlight swept across the massive steel entrance. A chain secured the doors. The padlock looked ancient. Fresh scratches gleamed across its surface. Someone had opened it recently. Crime scene instincts took over. No assumptions. No sudden movements. She photographed the lock before slipping through a narrow opening where one door refused to close completely. Darkness swallowed her almost instantly. The beam from her flashlight cut through floating dust, revealing endless rows of silent machinery. Looms stood frozen beneath torn plastic sheets. Conveyor belts disappeared into shadows thick enough to hide anything, or anyone. Every step echoed through the empty factory. 1, 2, 3, then a 4th. Shaw stopped walking. The echo continued. Not an echo. Footsteps. Somewhere ahead. She switched off her flashlight. The darkness became absolute. For nearly a minute, neither she nor the unseen figure moved. Then a faint metallic sound drifted across the warehouse. A coin. Rolling across concrete. It spun longer than it should have. Round and round. Slower. Slower. Until it finally collapsed with a soft ring that seemed impossibly loud. Shaw switched the flashlight back on. Nothing. No movement. No salud. Only an old brass token lying in the center of the aisle. She crouched beside it. One side carried the faded emblem of the textile company. The other, a single engraved sentence. Follow the light that never moves. She frowned. The phrase meant nothing. Yet someone had gone to remarkable effort to place it here. She slipped the token into an evidence bag. As she stood, the beam of her flashlight caught something high above, a window. Unlike every other window in the factory, this one reflected a steady white glow. Impossible. There was no electricity, no neighboring buildings, Nothing outside capable of creating such a reflection. Curiosity outweighed caution. She climbed the rusted iron staircase leading toward the second floor. Every step groaned beneath her weight. The railing shifted alarmingly. Halfway up, she noticed something unusual. Dust covered every surface, except the handrail. Someone had used these stairs recently. At the top, the corridor stretched into darkness. Office doors hung open. Stacks of water-damaged paperwork littered the floor. The glowing window waited at the far end. She approached carefully. The closer she came, the stranger became. The light wasn't outside. It was inside the glass, as though the window itself had trapped a piece of daylight and refused to let it fade. She reached out, touched the cold surface. Nothing happened. Then she noticed a frame. A tiny latch concealed beneath peeling paint. It opened with surprising ease. Inside the hollow wooden frame rested a narrow strip of photographic film, 35 millimeter, perfectly preserved. Someone had hidden it there decades earlier. The strip contained 12 exposures. Back at the forensic lab, technicians developed the negatives before sunrise. The first photograph showed an ordinary city intersection. The second captured the entrance to a subway station. The third, a rooftop overlooking downtown. At first glance, none appeared remarkable. Then the analyst aligned them on a light table. Every image contained the same person, always in the background, always partially obscured. A man wearing a dark overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat, never facing the camera, never close enough for identification, yet unmistakably the same individual. He wasn't posing. He wasn't following the photographer. He seemed to be watching. Every location, every scene, every moment. 12 photographs, taken over nearly 15 years, according to the film stock. The same silent observer appeared in all of them. Shaw leaned closer. Enlarged number 7. The technician adjusted the scanner. Pixels sharpened. Contrast increased. The man's reflection became visible in the polished window of a passing bus. Not his face. Just one detail. His left hand. He wore a ring unlike any Shaw had ever seen. Black metal. Smooth surface. No gemstone. Only a tiny symbol etched into its center. A circle. Broken by a single horizontal line. The analyst looked up. I've seen that before. Where? He opened an archive database. Seconds later, an old newspaper article filled the screen. The same symbol had been discovered carved into the wall of an abandoned observatory after an unsolved disappearance nearly 40 years earlier. Different city, different decade. No known connection. Until now. Shaw stared at the screen. 12 photographs. One hidden strip of film. One forgotten symbol. One observer who seemed to exist only at the edges of other people's lives. Outside, dawn finally broke across the city. Traffic returned. Coffee shops opened. People hurried to work without noticing the old textile mill standing silently against the skyline. They had no reason to look. Most mysteries announce themselves with violence. The dangerous ones begin with something far quieter. A forgotten photograph. A hidden message. And the unsettling realization that someone may have been watching the same story unfold long before anyone realized there was a story at all. Shaw didn't leave the laboratory. Not after seeing the ring. Not after watching the same anonymous figure appear in photograph after photograph. Year after year, always just beyond the edge of attention. Most people looked at the subject of a picture. Detectives learned to study the background. Sometimes the background was where the truth learned to hide. The negatives lay across the illuminated light table like fragments of forgotten memory. 12 images, 12 different places, 12 different days. Yet every one of them carried the same silent witness. The analyst adjusted the magnification. Look here. Shaw leaned closer. At first she saw nothing but blurred brickwork behind the man in the overcoat. Then the software sharpened a grain just enough to reveal a faded street sign. Ashcombe Avenue. She frowned. That street doesn't exist anymore. It did the analyst replied, until the redevelopment project in '98. A map appeared on another monitor. Entire neighborhoods had vanished beneath new apartment towers and office buildings. Streets renamed, buildings demolished, parking lots poured over places where families had once lived. History had been erased one construction permit at a time. Shaw traced the old map with her finger. Every photograph had been taken within walking distance of one another, not randomly. Deliberately, she circled the locations with a marker. They form an almost perfect circle. At the center, an empty city block. Or at least that was what modern records claimed. She requested archive zoning documents. Within 30 minutes, an aging city planner arrived carrying blueprints rolled inside cracked plastic tubes. He spread them across the conference table. Before redevelopment, he said quietly, there was another building here. He tapped the center of the circle, the Halcyon Hotel. Shaw had never heard of it. Neither had anyone else in the room. The planner smiled without humor. Most people haven't. The hotel opened in the 1940s, closed abruptly in the early 1980s, officially because of structural damage. Unofficially, he hesitated. Because people kept disappearing. No police file ever proved a connection. No criminal charges were filed. The hotel was demolished before investigators finished reviewing the complaints. The city called it an unfortunate coincidence. Families called it something else. By noon, Shaw stood on the same block where the Halcyon Hotel had once cast its shadow. Glass office towers reflected the afternoon sun. People hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Nobody realized they were walking across the footprint of a building that no longer officially existed. She closed her eyes, tried to imagine it. A revolving front door, a brass reception desk, elevators humming through the walls, guests checking in under names that may never have been real. The image vanished as quickly as it came. A maintenance worker approached. You with the police? She nodded. He looked around before lowering his voice. When they dug the foundation for this building, he stopped. What happened? They found another basement. Shaw's expression hardened. There wasn't supposed to be one. Construction records confirmed only a single underground level. Workers uncovered two. The lower level had already been filled with concrete before city inspectors arrived. The decision was made in less than 24 hours. No excavation. No documentation. Just concrete. Layer after layer, as if someone wanted whatever rested beneath to remain there forever. Back at headquarters, Shaw compared the construction timeline with the dates on mysterious photographs. The final picture had been taken only 3 weeks before demolition began. Not years. Weeks. Whoever hid the film knew the building was about to disappear. The thought sent a chill through the room. This wasn't someone recording history. This was someone preserving evidence before history erased it. That evening, heavy rain swept across the city. Most officers headed home. Shaw stayed. She enlarged the final photograph one last time. Her eyes wandered beyond the man in the overcoat, past the hotel entrance, past the parked cars, toward a second-floor window. A shape stood behind the glass, almost invisible. She adjusted the contrast. The figure became clearer, not watching the street, watching the man in the overcoat. 2 observers, each unaware, or perhaps completely aware, of the other. The room fell silent. Until now, Shaw believed every photograph contained one mystery. She had been wrong. There were 2. One person had been watching the city. Another had been watching the watcher. The analyst whispered, almost to himself, "So who was taking the picture?" No one answered. Because for the first time, they understood the unsettling possibility that the unseen photographer, the person behind the camera, might have been the only one who knew exactly what was about to happen inside the Halcyon Hotel before it vanished forever beneath concrete and steel. And somewhere hidden in the layers of a city rebuilt over its own forgotten past, there was almost certainly one last piece of evidence waiting for someone patient enough to realize that the photographs had never been the message. They were only the invitation. The motel sign had been dead for years. Every letter was dark except the final L, which flickered weakly against the midnight sky, as if refusing surrender with the rest. Rainwater dripped from the rusted metal frame, striking the empty parking lot with slow, rhythmic taps that sounded almost like footsteps. Detective Marcus Hale parked beneath the broken sign and killed the engine. Silence rushed in. Not the comforting silence of an empty place, the kind that felt occupied. Room 17 waited at the far end of the building. Its curtains were closed. A single yellow light glowed beneath the door. Dispatch had received 3 anonymous calls within 20 minutes. No screaming. No gunshots. The callers had all repeated the exact same sentence before hanging up. The room is occupied by someone who checked out 30 years ago. Hale disliked anonymous calls. They wasted time. They created ghosts where none existed. Yet something about the wording stayed with him during the drive. Not stayed. Checked out. The motel manager met him outside. An elderly woman wrapped in a faded blue cardigan. Her hands shook as she searched for the master key. I told them nobody's rented that room. But the light's on. She swallowed. It turns itself on. Hale didn't answer. He walked slowly along the cracked concrete walkway. Every room stood empty. Every window reflected only darkness, except room 17. The light beneath the door never flickered. He knocked. Once. Twice. No answer. The manager unlocked the door. It opened with a long, tired groan. The room smelled faintly of dust and fresh coffee. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains untouched. A rotary telephone rested beside the bed, its receiver neatly placed in the cradle. There were no suitcases, no clothing, no signs that anyone had lived there in decades. Only one thing looked out of place: a porcelain coffee cup. Steam still rose from it. Hale reached toward the handle. Warm. Someone had poured it less than a minute earlier. He searched the bathroom. Empty. Closet. Empty. Under the bed. Nothing. No hidden exits. No broken windows. The room had one door, the one he had just entered. The manager whispered behind him, "I told you." He ignored her. Instead, he noticed the television. It wasn't plugged into the wall, yet the screen glowed softly. Static. Then, without warning, the snow dissolved into a grainy black and white image. A motel hallway. The same hallway. Room 17. Only. Everything looked new. Fresh paint. Bright lights. New carpeting. The date appeared in the lower corner. October 14th, 1994. Security footage. Halisite Putkalusiv. The camera showed a man exiting room 17 carrying a leather briefcase. He paused, looked directly into the camera, then slowly raised one finger, as if asking someone to wait. The image froze. Static returned. The detective looked toward the hallway outside. Empty. He looked back at the television. The man was gone. Only static remained. Crime scene technicians arrived 20 minutes later. They photographed everything, collected fingerprints, swabbed the coffee cup, tested the television. The results made no sense. The coffee contained caffeine brewed less than 15 minutes earlier. The fingerprints on the cup belonged to a guest who had officially died in 1994. The television had no internal electronics. Behind the screen, nothing. No circuit boards, no wiring. Only an empty shell. As dawn approached, Hale requested every registration record the motel had ever kept. Most had been destroyed by water damage years earlier. One ledger survived. Its pages had yellowed with age. The final occupied entry for room 17 was dated October 14th, 1994. Guest name: Elias Ward. Time of departure: 12:03 a.m. Remarks: never returned for his briefcase. Hale Fronit. What briefcase? The manager looked genuinely confused. There wasn't one. He turned the ledger toward her. You wrote this. She stared at the faded handwriting. After several long seconds, the color drained from her face. Quietly, almost afraid of hearing her own voice, she said, "That's my signature." She looked up. But I've never seen this page before. Outside, the first light of morning crept over the deserted parking lot. The motel looked ordinary again. Just another forgotten building waiting for demolition. But inside room 17, the coffee cup still sat on the table. The steam had finally disappeared. Beside it, where there had been nothing moments earlier, rested a worn leather briefcase. No one had seen it arrive. No one had opened the door. And stamped into the brass lock was a single date. Tomorrow. The library should have been empty. It was 2:06 in the morning. Rain drifted against stained glass windows in slow, uneven bursts, while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the old courthouse square. Every floor lamp had been switched off hours ago. Every entrance was locked, yet one desk lamp still burned on the third floor. A single pool of warm light surrounded an open book. Detective Adrian Mercer paused at the foot of the spiral staircase. The anonymous call had lasted only 9 seconds. Someone is reading the dead. Nothing else. No name. No address. Just enough for dispatch to trace the call to the century-old Hawthorne Public Library. Mercer climbed the stairs one careful step at a time. The wooden treads groaned beneath his weight, each sound swallowed almost immediately by the towering shelves that disappeared into darkness. Dust floated to the beam of his flashlight like tiny fragments of ash. The reading room was exactly as the caller described. One lamp, one chair, one open book. Nobody inside. The book rested on a heavy oak table worn smooth by decades of hands. Its leather binding had cracked with age. The title page had been torn away long ago, leaving only yellowed paper that smelled faintly of mildew and tobacco. The pages were filled with handwritten names. Hundreds of them, each followed by a date. Nothing more. No addresses. No explanations. Just names. Mercer flipped to the final page. Only one line had been written. His own. Adrian Mercer, October 18th. He checked his watch. October 17th. A cold silence settled over the room. Behind him, somewhere deep among the shelves, a book fell to the floor. The sound echoed far longer than it should have. Mercer spun around. Nothing. Only endless rows of forgotten volumes stretching into darkness. He called for backup anyway. Officers arrived within minutes, searching every corridor, archive room, and basement storage area. No signs of forced entry. No footprints in the dust. No hidden doors. The security system confirmed that no one had entered the building after closing. Yet the desk lamp remained warm. Someone had switched it on recently. The mysterious ledger was transported to the forensic laboratory before dawn. Fingerprint powder revealed dozens of overlapping impressions collected over many decades. None belonged to any person in the national database. The ink posed an even stranger problem. Chemical analysis showed that the earliest entries had been written nearly 70 years ago. The newest, less than an hour before Mercer found the book. One volume. One handwriting style. 7 decades. Impossible. A historian from the state archives arrived that afternoon. She examined the binding in silence before finally speaking. I've seen this style once before. She produced a faded photograph taken inside the same library in 1958. A literacy program. 23 people smiling toward the camera. In the background, resting on a reading table almost unnoticed, the same book. Open to different pages. Mercer enlarged the image. The historian pointed toward an elderly man seated alone near the windows. He donated thousands of books to this library. Who was he? Professor Nathaniel Cross. What happened to him? She hesitated. No one knows. Cross had vanished during a winter storm in 1964. His office remained untouched for years. His apartment was found locked from the inside. Dinner still sat on the table. His coat hung beside the front door. He had simply ceased to exist. Mercer requested access to Professor's archive correspondence. Most of it consisted of academic letters and lecture notes. One envelope contained something different. A handwritten page. No greeting. No signature. Only a single paragraph. Every city keeps two histories. One is written in newspapers. The other survives only in memory. When memory begins to disappear, someone must become its librarian. The final sentence had been underlined twice. Mercer folded the letter carefully. Back at the library, electricians inspected the reading room. The lamp that had been glowing during the night wasn't connected to any power source. The cord ended cleanly beneath the table. No batteries. No heating waiting. Nothing capable of producing light. Yet several officers independently confirmed they had seen it burning. The following evening, Mercer returned alone. The storm had passed. Moonlight filtered through stained glass, painting fractured colors across the silent floor. He walked directly to the same table. The mysterious ledger was gone. The surface was empty except for a thin layer of dust. He stood motionless for several minutes, listening. Old buildings never truly fell silent. Pipes settled. Wood expanded. Wind whispered through ancient masonry. But beneath those familiar sounds, another rhythm emerged. A slow turning of pages. Not nearby. Above him. He looked toward the highest gallery, where iron walkways connected forgotten archives, sealed to the public decades earlier. His flashlight swept across the darkness. Nothing. Then, for less than a heartbeat, he saw a figure standing between the shelves. Tall. Motionless. Holding a book against its chest. The beam struck the place again. The gallery was empty. Mercer climbed the narrow staircase anyway. Dust covered every step, except the last one. Someone had walked there recently. At the end of the gallery stood a single wooden lectern. Upon it rested a folded index card. No fingerprints. No handwriting. Only words produced by an old mechanical typewriter. You don't find the book. A second line waited beneath it. The book finds the next name. The wind rose outside, rattling the stained glass windows as thunder rolled once more across the sleeping city. Mercer slipped the card into an evidence envelope and looked back across the endless rows of shelves. For the first time in his career, the library no longer felt like a place that stored stories. It felt like a place that was still writing them.